Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3.
So good morning and welcome to the Committee of the Whole meeting in Town of Qualicum Beach. And the first thing I want to do is acknowledge that we are on the traditional territory of the Coast Salish people, in particular our friends of Qualicum Nation. And the first item is the agenda itself. Any changes to the agenda? Seeing none, then the agenda is adopted by consent. And the first up is the Planning, Community Development, Emergency Planning. And Mr. Sales, would you introduce our delegation?
Thank you, Mayor Westbrook. Just a little bit of background on this project. In 2021, the province of BC introduced a program called the Local Government Development Approvals Program with the intention of helping local governments to improve their development review processes, to make them more transparent for the public, more efficient from the perspective of local government, and also from the development side, clarifying. So the intent was to the intention of the application that the town submitted was to develop a toolkit of resources that would benefit the town, drawing on best practices from many other municipalities, and also have a toolkit that could be adapted for other municipalities' use as well. So this project has been going on for a few years, and this is the final presentation of the results of that work. We have today with us, we have Tanisha Everts and Mark Holland to present a summary of the toolkit, and then following, council will have an opportunity for questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Tanisha. That's interesting. That's a Dutch name. You're talking with a guy from named Mark Holland, so good combination. Go ahead.
The mayor loves us because of our very Dutch roots, yeah. Good morning, Your Worship and Council. Nice to see you all again. As we just said, my name is Tanisha Everts, and you know my business partner, Mark Holland. We have been part of a team that has been working on the Adaptable Development Approvals Process Toolkit, also known as ADAPT, and we are excited to present to you the final completed toolkit today. This is what we will cover in our presentation. So the project purpose and overview, our current status, the approvals, process issues and challenges, a review of the ADAPT system and its parts, and last but not least, an outline of next steps and time for questions. Next slide, I guess. So the purpose of the project, which began 3 years ago, was to focus on implementable solutions. The project is part of the UBCM Development Approvals Process Review, or DAPR funding. This funding was brought forward due to the housing crisis that our province is facing. The funding was distributed to individual communities to tweak their development approvals process. There was no guidance or standards for how that funding had to be used, as long as it improved the approvals. This has led to many communities with reports outlining the same issues raised in the original 2019 DAPR report, and a big focus on spending the UBCM funds on new tools and technology to try and streamline and digitize approvals. Our project focuses on the people and the process and refines the existing systems to solve the most common challenges. Qualicum Beach is spearheading this work and adapting the toolkit to your community. But rather than having one consultant come in and write one of the reports I mentioned earlier, Mr. Sales opted to have ADAPT be an open source tool because we all do better when we learn from and listen to others. Qualicum Beach is benefiting from 3 years of work, extensive graduate and consultant research, some lively debates between Mark and I, interviews with public and private sector planners, and so much more. And that is a great testament to the culture you've created in these walls. I'll get into a bit more detail about those involved here. The core team is on the left and included the Town of Qualicum Beach, Vancouver Island University, Mount Arrowsmith Biosphere Region Research Institute, or MABRI, and Westplan. Funding sources were UBCM and MyTax. Our community partners included the City of Duncan, District of Peachland, Town of View Royal, Cowichan Tribes, City of Parksville, and more. We also sought guidance from other professionals, the Urban Development Institute, and various BC development companies. This slide outlines our process beginning in September 2021. We are now launching the toolkit, which will be available on the MABRI website for any community to use. Now for the fun stuff. This is the generic approvals process from idea or concept through to when you see the bylaw or permit come forward. The process for most types of applications is the same, with some steps in the process sizing up or down depending on legal aspects, the context, and the community. Our project focused on refining these steps, which are handled differently everywhere, and addressed the most typical challenges. When I say challenges, I don't just mean applicants or owners that might have a bone to pick, throwing a tantrum because they didn't get their way. There are some very real issues that we found are common in the majority of communities' development approvals processes, and the issues are on both sides. This is why the toolkit is written for both public sector planners and the applicant. Challenges include poor quality and incomplete applications, unclear process, difficulty understanding what regulations apply or not, contradictory policies or department requirements, requests made well into the process or late hits, no commitment or accountability to timelines for reviews, little transparency in the review, no clear way to solidify agreements along the way, which leads to changing goalposts, unclear expectations around community engagement and issues with trust, and different standards everywhere, which is hard to navigate as an applicant. We found that because anyone can make an application, we needed to cast a wide net that included both the low capacity and the high capacity applicants, because staff are not supposed to act as consultants for folks. But they are there to provide good customer service and guidance. We also had to keep in mind that most planning documents may not have had much due diligence, and their feasibility is usually tested through applications. And we had to think about how and when council has dialogue on a project. I've covered that there are no norms, and that can lead to low accountability, and a culture can form around that too. Then the process can get really stuck in the mud, but the applicant can't do much about it, because you need the council approval and to keep working with that staff. So if there is drama, it plays out politically, and that's not ideal for any party involved. Our toolkit includes these 7 core elements. Before Mark gets into these in detail, I want to personally comment on the necessity of ADAPT, because I think will help you to see why this toolkit can be so valuable. I have worked as a planner in a fast-growing town and had a director that established firm timelines, smooth process, detailed and defendable staff reports, and above all else, good customer service. We had rezonings typically completed in 9 months. After I went back to the private sector in 2020, I was hired to do 2 rezonings there. These single lot rezonings were fully supported by policy and in areas of town that were set for growth. One got adopted earlier this year, and I'm still awaiting 4th reading for another. The process and the regulations didn't change, the staff and the culture did, and that's why our toolkit includes these elements that touch each step of the approvals process, from perspectives and philosophies for planners and applicants to pre-made detailed application forms and website content. The details, and more than anything, consistency matter. I will now pass it on to Mark to get into those.
Thank you, Tanisha, Your Worship, Council. It's a real pleasure to be back with you again. Tanisha just quickly gave you an overview of 3 years of amazing discussions that happened. The input that we got from so many different communities and consultants, to so many developers, allowed us to kind of pull this apart and figure this out. One thing you may have noticed over the last number of years is the province has, decided they wanted to intervene in the development process, and the first thing they did was pull out the finger and point it at UBCM and all the municipalities. And when we got inside of this, there's been many reports since that sort of echoed some of that. When we got inside of it, we found it to be far more complex and far more interesting. And what really the challenge was to not point the finger, but actually try and find a good solution. And so the combination of the public interest and the private interest and all the people who were involved, we were continually shocked even at finding our own blank spots. It's like we'd look at each other and go, I don't actually know how to do that. I've never had to do that before, but that's pretty important. And then we'd phone up a consultant and say, well, what are the terms of reference for that study? And they'd go, well, actually, we kind of make it up as we go, and things like, or other ones, oh no, this is very well laid out, just nobody knew about it. So this has been a really interesting process to do that. I'd like to talk through each of the key points. I'll just open the toolbox now and show you sort of what we created over the last 3 years. The first one was a sense of culture. You will have heard this, you will have experienced it, but it was one of the first things that really continually emerged. There's always an uneasy relationship between an applicant and a gatekeeper. The job of the gatekeeper is to always look after the public interest and make sure proper protocol, you have Local Government Act, everything needs to be followed. followed. The applicant's coming from anything. Any landowner is a developer. And the question is, do they know what they're doing? In our firm, we're constantly having to take landowners back to the beginning and go, did you do a financial model? Is this even viable before we start spending a lot of money on it? Often, surprisingly, there's not. So this emerged as an important of a culture of working together, where there was a commitment of both parties to the interests of the others, clarity, efficiency, et cetera. So I won't go through all of those things. You can see what's written there. Those would make sense as a culture of collaboration. Not so much that the applicant, the thing that came up in here was the applicant doesn't get to be approved because there's a culture of collaboration. All the rules and standards must be applied. But when there's a mystery process to it, when there's a lot of late hits and a lot of surprises that lead to a lot of negativity, this undermines the public interest. You end up not getting the housing, you end up with a lot of anxiety, rooms full of angry people, all sorts of things emerge. On the other side, we need to have that clarity so there's a lot of mutual respect. So this is something that we've never formally, council has codes of conduct, we have codes of behavior in a restaurant. We actually never had one of these for the development approvals process, so that's what this is. The next piece is actually going down inside, opening up the hood, if you will, and getting inside the engine of the approvals process. You would be very surprised at how many conversations we had with the planners as we went through this, because we had about a dozen municipalities we were in dialogue with pretty steadily around, oh, not everybody does it that way. Like, oh no, nobody else does it that way, actually. You're special in how you do that. Most other people do it this way, and then you get inside, it's like, no, they don't actually all agree on that either. There are no norms. The local government gives you a few key check boxes you have to do, a first and a second reading, things like that. But between there, it's completely unmapped. And so this was working with all of the parties, line by line, step by step, and we're continually to evolve this as we're working with more municipalities on their projects to begin to get a really clear, what does this mean by a process of collaboration? How would that actually play out? And what do you need to know when, so that your director of planning is not constantly looking at inadequate applications, is not dealing with all of this angst, has a good, clean process. The applicants know exactly what comes next. They know why, it's clearly defensible, and the sort of emotional tenor of it comes really down. So in all of your governance here in Qualicum Beach, you have lots of protocols and processes that keep it organized. We don't have that nationally. We don't have that across the province. So that's what we got into working that, and a lot of interesting things came up as we did that. The next thing, as Tanisha noted, and I need to, again, emphasize this again, is that a lot of applicants are not professionals in the development process. They're not an engineer, they're not a planner, they don't have that background. They have a piece of land, and they look at the plan and they know they might need to make a change, but they want to come in and subdivide their lot, or they'd like to add another suite, a suite to it maybe, something like that. They're a doctor, they're a hairdresser, they're a travel agent, they do something else for a living. This is quite a complex field, and so the guide became very important. And so our group worked through the internal process and then developed a full guide that goes with it. What this means is any municipality that wants to kind of engage this, this is all copyright free. They can basically just adapt it, do a tweak. They don't have to hire a consultant for $50,000 to go in and rewrite this. It's all there, just tweak it, your staff can do that, and that's a clean walk away there. Forms, every application form, Tanisha and I work in a lot of communities, I don't know how many, lost count. Every application form is different. And it was really interesting to go through them all and see which ones were helpful and which ones were not. In fact, we actually found Oak Bay, of all places, our postcard for struggling to provide housing, actually one of the best application forms, very clear what was needed. Did you talk to the planner? Do you know you need it or not? And it was like, well, that's interesting, as well as other communities had some really good ones, as did yours. So it was a very interesting process, and so we put together a draft set of application forms, again, trying to short circuit the need for a community to spend money on staff, consultants to kind of do something like this to upgrade it. Websites. Obviously, we all work from websites now, so the guide, the process, ultimately, we all start at the website and frequently end at the website. And if we can't find it on the website, Tanisha and I struggle with this all the time. We put together applications with the information we can find, and we bring it in and find out there was a whole bunch of things that weren't on the website. And even after a couple calls, we didn't even know what questions to ask. And we've been at this for decades and decades. So it's, in fact, the conversation we were having 15 minutes, well, half an hour ago over here at Bailey's was reviewing an application I wrote that got sent back because I was missing a bunch of things. And I went, but I checked all the boxes, so who knows? So this whole process of a website that would have all of this, it's all, again, open source. It matches the guide, and it can be very easily adapted. You don't have to go and spend thousands and thousands on a brand new website update. It's there. You can easily fix it in. This was possibly one of the most intriguing moments. We went around, any application requires a whole series of professional work. And as we worked our way through this, it became apparent that nobody in the room, and I mean nobody in the room, at any point actually fully understood any of this. It was quite intriguing. No one knew what anybody else was doing. We often will ask, let's say, we need a traffic impact study. I'm not sure if you've had the privilege of going down the rabbit hole with a traffic consultant and going, well, did we need, like when we say TIA, what do we mean? Like what's the question we're trying to answer here through the study? Turns out there's a whole stack of versions of TIAs that involve different levels of work. If we're making this so that it works for a family that wants to do something, a $10,000 study is 2 years of tuition at VIU for their student. That's a little different than a big development company coming in where everything is just, tax deductible. This is major impact. So we don't want to ask for more than we need because council may in their wisdom choose to not allow this to proceed, in which case if we spent a lot of money, well, we didn't need that. We just needed to answer the question at each step. Well, it turned out to be fascinating. We're still, this is the reason why it's not fully released yet. We're still down the rabbit hole with all of those different consultants, talking with them about, well, how do you do things, et cetera. It's very, very fascinating. So there will be a draft set of terms of references for all the different studies that might need to be done for every one of those consultants available as part of this toolkit to make it clear to the applicants and also have a common conversation with staff and council as you get into those. I think this is maybe here as we get sort of to the end of the toolkit here and my last few comments. The community engagement is so critical, and this was one of the things that we, I think, appreciated distinctly with your Director of Planning and the precedent that Qualicum Beach sets. You are one of the most open governments that we know of in terms of your openness to the community, the transparency, the engagement, and the commitment of citizens. You update your OCP twice as many times as anybody else, and you have robust, distinct discussions on everything that matters. You have a very high capacity community. It was a very high bar, and so this process of going, what are the expectations? Because otherwise you as council get an applicant saying, well, I held a meeting, or I did this, or no one knows, was it adequate? Was there, and what was in the meeting, and things like this. So this is an attempt to create, this would probably be the appropriate expectations, and when we say it's a public meeting or there's a website, this is what should be available. The community needs to be informed, and they need to have the ability to comment on it, because the applicant needs to do that. There are no standards right now on that. So this is what we came here together to do, was to begin to pull some of those. We touched on the First Nations review. This one's a little bit light in the toolkit at the moment, and we expect a lot more will be added. We are establishing a center with Vancouver Island University coming up in the next year that will pick all of this work up and continue to advance it. But the First Nations one was interesting because they get referrals, but there's also a respectful landowner, notification that you might want to do. They're very busy. Do they have time? One of the things we uncovered from interviewing for a number of First Nations was the need for an application fee for them, so that they get a bit of a check to pay somebody to review it. Because let's say if you're doing something in Lake Cowichan, the Supasat First Nation has 30 members. Soup to nuts, that's it. So who's going to review all the applications coming through? Well, they need some extra help, and there's nothing to suggest that any one of them would have had the training and education to go through all those professional reports. So this was one thing that came up that we thought was a very respectful component to include, and it's recommended in the toolkit. So each community is unique, and this is sort of where the term ADAPT came from. All of these are excellent best practices, and they're available copyright-free for anyone to draw in. Your Director of Planning has been in a constant dialogue with us for 3 years as you've been asking him to do updates and work on things. So this has been a constant dialogue. He has literally been adapting what we're building based on his experience and then adapting it into your processes as you go. So it's been very live with some very great discussions. I'd just like here in the final moments here to just look into 2 or 3 of the tools. I'll just pick a couple of the tools out of the toolkit and we can look at them. This first one here was essentially a question about development applications in principle. As Tanisha noted, when you do an official community plan, there is no due diligence done on any particular parcel. That's not its job. Its job is to look at the community as a whole, to have those policy discussions as a whole, to explore a macro pattern that seems to fit the public objectives. But then just like we might all do in our financial plans for our lives, we kind of pick an overarching trajectory, but then we have to make individual decisions on a day-by-day basis. Are we in alignment with that or not? And we need to make that decision. The development approval system is the second stage of community planning. The first one is the overarching plan, and the next one is where we take each parcel and go, does that work? Do we need to change it or not? And how does that work? So an OCP amendment, even a rezoning, is all part of that process. So this was one of the first philosophy tools that we found in there, was to understand that the application process is as important as the OCP or other macro planning processes, because the two go together. Because when we do an individual parcel, then we understand so much more about what's real, and then we get to decide on the trade-offs. As opposed to, in some communities, certainly our experience is that an application is seen as an offense. You're trying to change my plan, this is an offense. It's like, well, no, they're actually they're sister siblings. They're two sides of the same coin, and that's why the discipline and structure that we're proposing here is needed, so that it is as accountable as your OCP in its process. The next one that was interesting was, and this one, we walked into this one backwards after trying to solve a problem again and again and again. Here's what happens in a typical community. The applicant comes in, applies, engages staff, then hires a whole battery of consultants that all do a whole bunch of studies. We go back and forth on the pre-app process in a number of ways. That applicant may have more skills and call your staff a little less. Other ones may not, and Luke Sales becomes the busiest development consultant around, coaching all the applicants through everything, et cetera. We work our way through it. By the time you see it at first reading, they may have been going for 2 years. They may have spent $150,000, and you can imagine how attached the applicant is to that at that point, and everyone's worked through it. You may have a recommendation from staff, you may not, but for the first time you see that, we're way down the rabbit hole on that one for a lot of money and a lot of time. And we then bring that to you, and this is really the first time you've seen it. Now, obviously, it'll have really good professional work with your staff having gone through it, but this may not be in alignment with any of your political priorities, right? They're asking for an amendment to the OCP. They've gone through all this time. We felt that was really undemocratic, frankly, and a lot of money wasted and a lot of money spent, when we probably should have had a conversation with you first. And so this was one recommendation. Obviously, every council deals with this differently, but very early on, with almost just minimal staff time, maybe a one-page memo or something to just confirm the facts, that an applicant would have 5 minutes in a COW meeting to say, I think I'd like to do this, and I'd be interested in council's opinion. No decisions are made. Councilors don't have to speak, but getting some dialogue with council as the representatives who you sense where the community needs to go. All policies and plans are your policies and plans. You can change them anytime you want, but to give some feedback on the priorities, because OCPs have lots of contradictory priorities in them depending on which way you look. We felt that would be possibly one of the most important things any community could do to avoid wasting lots of staff time. Because if you as council turn it down at first reading, there's 1.5 years of your staff's time that has now basically vaporized, which could have been spent on other good public interests. So this was something that we felt, and this was particularly for smaller communities with much more engaged councils. You know, if we're talking about the city of Vancouver or something, man, you're in it for 5 years before you get to council, and everyone knows that. And council has a different relationship with applications, and in fact, many of them just go to staff for approval. So we felt that in small communities, this was a simple move, but that would provide a much greater dialogue and political accountability before a lot of staff time is taken and wasted in application processes, and applicants get really wound up and spend a lot of money on it. Again, just to reiterate the community engagement, this was a clear set of expectations, you know, a website, mail drop, open house, and every community will have a different expectation there, but those can be laid out very clear, and then you have the confidence that when something comes to you, it has had its discussion. So our final points then, moving forward, we're doing final refinements now, and a lot of this right now is just formatting and also going through with all the consultants again to make sure that our terms of reference are clearly understood, because you're going deep into many different professions. And then this will be made public. And as I mentioned, our university intends to move forward on continuing to add and adapt this as we go forward. So I'd just like to close by thanking you all for your leadership on this, and in particular your Director of Planning. It was a privilege to work with him for 3 years as he brought coherent, cogent thought. He represented the public interest. He lives here with you making hard decisions and made sure that everything that was created would pass his straight face test as we struggled through that. He was very open-minded and listened to what everybody else was doing and would say, that's a great idea, actually. That had never come up in our world. Or, you know, I think here's what our experience is. I think you'll probably find this work better. It's been really a privilege to work with him. And many communities here in BC will now benefit because of your leadership and your willingness to invest in this. So we look forward to seeing how everything gets adapted going forward, and this has a much more life ahead of it. So we look forward to future conversations. Thank you.
Thank you. There may be some questions, Mr. Holland and Ms. Avers. So any questions from council? Councillor Harrison.
Yeah, thank you very much, Your Worship. So just to the chair, so you mentioned that you'd reach out to some people who actually are on the other side, the applicants. Were any of them local? Because I'm just thinking in the previous term, at the very start, there was a project that was very troubled for several reasons, and one of the proponents actually ended up taking their own lives. So I really want to make sure that we're reaching out to the local development committee to make sure that everything we can do to make sure at least the process is transparent. It might be a little bit higher bar than some other communities, but at least it's a transparent, understandable process, and we're making sure on our side everything is up to the highest standard. So I'm just curious how much outreach is actually happening with the local development community.
Thank you for your question, Councillor Harrison, through the chair. I'm sorry, I can't remember all of the developers that were engaged in this process. Tanisha and I represented a lot. We work all up and down the island, including folks here in the RDN and your community. We brought in a lot of those stories and our experiences from that. I can't remember if we specifically approached them. What we envision the toolkit being is being adapted. And when you put a proposed process in front of an applicant, they can then comment on it. This was the first big mountain we had to get over, was we were all like, well, how would we do it differently? And we spent a lot of time, this is where your director of planning and us had so many great conversations in the first year and a half was, yeah, well, that's problematic. Well, then, but we still have the public interest and there's still the legislative requirement and there's all these things. Well, how would we do it differently? We found that going simply to ask folks, well, what we got, you know, well, what do you think? What we got was a list of things they don't like. It was like, but we're trying to build something new. So the idea here is a conversation can happen. This represents mostly island developers. We had the Urban Development Institute, I think the Construction Association commented on it. We got good feedback from them, and we work with them closely. But this is the kind of thing where you can bring to your own local development community and say, if we wanted to begin to maybe make some changes to our development procedures bylaw, what do you think of these proposals? You get way better feedback when you put something in front of them as opposed to, now let's invent something from nothing. So this one's been vetted by both sides extensively. So we're hoping that it's 80% of the way there, but each community has its own sensibility and its own process. So, yeah.
And just to follow up, if I may, I mean, you did make it clear that you're not quite done yet, so it's not like we're producing a final document and here it is, this is just what it has to be. So I do hope that when we get really close to the finish line, we just have a little bit of back and forth, because talking to some of the local people who are building homes, there was a sense of fear that if they stuck out their neck and said, here's a big problem, that they might get rejected at a future application. And so they were not talking about real problems that could have benefited. At the end of the day, it makes the housing cheaper, basically, is what it does. Yep. Because all the costs for pre-development get multiplied by your financing costs, which is usually like 20% for sales, and I don't know what it is for rentals, but it's even more. Yeah. So it's not just a $50,000 study, it's 50,000 times 20%, so it's now 60,000. So all these costs just get added on to the final unit, and ideally, they make a fair profit, but it's a little bit cheaper for whoever moves in.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Harrison. Any other questions or comments? You told us you've been working with our staff for about 3 years. Since that time, we had Bill 44. How did that change this whole process that you were working on?
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. That's a great question. And last time we were here was to talk with you about Bill 44. The main impact on that one was the relationship to the public hearing during the process here. So now that your OCPs, and we're all about to embark on next year as so many communities address their OCPs, we're all now embarking on the question of what is an OCP? If it essentially decides whether there's a public hearing or not, what needs to be in it to make that the right determination? That was the biggest change, was the politics and the emotions and the drama that occur around an OCP, or pardon me, a public hearing. From a development applicant's point of view, the preparation for public hearings is epic. And the lead time in trying to get voices to support it when you know there's going to be voices against it, that whole drama is actually quite a distraction, a very expensive distraction often, and it really creates a polarization that takes us away. It adds so much emotions into what is often a trade-off discussion or a difficult discussion. That was the biggest thing that we noted in Bill 44, was that it would remove some of that. Obviously, it and Bill 47 had implications on parking and other things like this that came through. Most of those are technical requirements just of a good project. They didn't really affect the development process as much. So that kind of culmination of emotions and drama that is typically a public hearing was by far the biggest change. Now, it doesn't mean that they're not there. Anytime we're going to grapple with an OCP amendment, we're back in front of this, or depending on what variances are asked, we may be back with a public hearing. I think the community engagement process was also part of that, so as to avoid shadow public hearings. If we can make sure that people know what the issues are and they've had a legitimate conversation, an educated and informed conversation through that process, then, and you get it in a legitimate way, then you can trust a lot more of what's coming and may feel less inclined or less the need to, I need to have an open mic and a lot of intensity here to be sure that I really understand how the community feels about it. So that kind of pushed us in that direction, made that more important. If you're not going to have the public hearing, then the community engagement is more important, because we're not relying on that final open mic to lay it all out for us. So I would say those are probably the major change.
Thank you, because we pride ourselves of having committee of the whole meetings, but before we make a decision, we ask the gallery if they have any comments or questions so that we can include them in our recommendation to the next council meeting. Today, we have a couple of examples of that. Today is also not a recommendation to move forward with this, but when it comes, we will bring it back to committee of the whole and we will invite public input, but not today. So thank you for your presentation. Councilor Harrison.
Just one more thing, Your Worship, my apologies. Just with the updated process with Bill 44 is you update your OCP for a population projection, then you are required to have zoning in your community to meet that population projection. So I noticed one of the slides said, the zoning and the OCP don't always line up, and that's certainly been an issue historically in our community for a couple of things. Between that and then the other, I had a second question, but I just think we'll do that one first. So how is that process actually going to play out in every community when we do that pre-zoning? Is this something where council is going to have more of a say of, we want the development concentrated in this smaller area, or is it like they're more of a mandated approach?
Thank you, through your worship, through the chair. I think you're right. It will play out slightly differently. The intent that was the discussion, that at least the ones we were part of leading into this in the larger community, larger professional community with the government, was the process of trying to encumber all future housing with expensive processes, delays, and a lot of emotions was setting it up for dubious and probable failure in many cases, and I think that's contributed to the housing crisis across the province, not so much in your individual community. The idea of an OCP, because the previous Local Government Act only required 5 years of housing capacity in your OCP, and you're the only community in BC that updates them about every 5 years. Most would be 10 to 15. So we were so far out of misalignment. And if you want a balanced market for supply and demand, any realtor in Canada will tell you need about 5 months of inventory. So do we have 5 times more housing than we'll need in any unit of time in our plans? That's not part of the actual requirement here, but at least 20 years gives you a pretty good chance. And if that's being updated periodically, you will be ahead of the curve in terms of housing. The zoning process is where all the drama and expense came through. Even though the OCP said this, then we still had to go through all of that to get there. If you update your zoning, so you know the zoning has got capacity, and you know the OCP has got capacity for 20 years, I think the community, our sense is, as planners, is that the nature of the community planning process means your town has enough housing, and you all decided on it together. Because otherwise what happens is we come up with an OCP and then we come in and change it. We basically then replan the city and kind of ignore it in some ways, like it becomes a battleground. Whereas if you have a clear OCP and clear zoning, you have 20 years of capacity. you can feel a lot more comfortable basically saying no to applications because you say, listen, there's a lot of capacity out here. Go buy one of those pieces of land. You will still want to engage in rezonings and OCP amendments just because there isn't a deep due diligence done on them all, and some landowners are ready to move and others are not. But that's the thinking behind it as we understand it, is that it creates a more publicly accountable housing capacity rather than re-waging the war and having housing capacity potentially be putting council in difficult situations of having to reflect their community's desires, but be facing a housing crisis every single application. So I think that was the intent behind the larger discussion with the province.
And we're also part of the, we're also part of a regional growth strategy. So how does that fit in with what we're doing as a local government?
Thank you. The RGS, I don't believe, was mentioned in any of those bills, so I think that's going to be a conversation that you all have around where that goes in terms of boundaries or more intensity internally. You'll all be looking at your OCPs and then figuring out how much capacity do we have for our housing, and then do we need more land, or how does that work? I don't believe that the provincial legislation, I think, was silent on RGSs primarily. The other thing that the legislation did was it gave you more powers to solve problems that otherwise were dealt with as zoning. So delegating the ability to take frontage improvements to a development permit. Previously, you had to hold off on that because the only time you could take it was a rezoning. So that gave intent, that was impetus for municipalities to hold off on it and make that more difficult. So delegation and those sorts of things to those other areas was other really important pieces of the legislation.
Okay, the reason why I ask, Mr. Holland, is because in Area G, which is just next to us, between us and Parksville, they were advised by the ministry that they have to plan for higher density, and they don't have the capacity, they don't have the water, so they're kind of between a rock and a hard place, saying, okay, we would like to see more development, but we don't have the capacity or the water to do it.
Yeah.
So does this not apply any of it to the regional districts?
Not in near the same way, Your Worship, not near the same way as it does to municipalities. And you nailed exactly the reason why. The challenges with infrastructure are critical. The ability of a regional district to borrow is almost non-existent. And so without borrowing, any extensions of your infrastructure would be kind of a dream, because who wants to I've already got my own well, I've already got my own sewer, and now you want me to pay a bunch of money for studies and another millions of dollars. So that doesn't, we're dying on this hill every day trying, because the regional districts are growing, right? There's people moving out there and the water supplies are not. And so there's this constant need to get this more organized. So yeah, I think the province took what they could see in front of them, and the regional districts are now emerging, going, okay, yeah, we need to have that conversation too. Yeah.
They definitely do. Well, thank you. I think your presentation was very timely considering the rest of the meeting agenda, so appreciate it very much.
Thank you so much.
So next, we have Zero Carbon Step Code and Mr. Mark Bernard, Bernard Contracting. So, Mr. Sales, again, we should do the introduction.
Thank you, Mayor Westbrook. My introduction will be very short. Earlier this year, Council considered the adoption of the Energy Step Code and the Zero Carbon Step Code. And at that time, Council had some questions about how those various codes would result in potential construction costs. And there was just a lot of questions that came up. So we reached out through our network to people in the province that were very knowledgeable from the contracting and costing side, so that someone could come here and present to you about the Energy Step Code and Zero Carbon Step Code and answer all your questions. So we're very happy to have Mark Bernhardt here today, who's one of the province's leading experts in the field. So I'll hand it back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sales, and welcome, Mr. Bernard. You have the floor.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Good to be in Qualicum Beach. So just a little extra on the introduction. So Bernhardt Contracting, our head office is Victoria, but we do have a base of operation here in Qualicum. We have offices spread around the province as well, and we were doing Step Code before it was called Step Code. We also run a development company, and so we understand the costs of Step Code and the implications. One of our firms is also an energy consultancy, so we do all this Step Code permitting mumbo jumbo, and by doing so, we collect the data as well. So we have the receipts, essentially. But let's get into it a bit. And I want to start by just briefly explaining what a performance code is. So the step codes, both the carbon and the energy step code, are performance-based codes. The old way of doing things is a prescriptive approach, saying you must use 3 nails per 2x4 to hold this wall up. And that doesn't allow us to innovate, doesn't allow us to be creative, versus a code that says this wall must be strong and stand up. It must hold the roof up. Those are performance-based metrics. And we can do, if we do that, we can innovate, we can invent new things, and we don't have to stick to this specific thing, and allows us to reduce costs in many cases. And the energy step code and the carbon step code are both performance-based codes, and they really are aimed to solve a problem. The government, the Liberal government at the time, came to industry and said, we've got this problem of climate change, how are we going to solve it, what are you guys able to do? And the industry came back and said, make us an incremental code that changes over time and allows us to predict where we're going to be in 5 years. And the result is the energy and carbon step code. So in many ways, it is a builder-driven code. It's a code that was built by builders for builders. Although, you know, as builders, we all love to complain about building codes, so as is our right of holding a builder license. So getting into some of the data that we have, when we initially started down this path, there was a lot of people kind of losing their mind about how much R-value we're going to need to put in a wall, right? It's going to have these super thick walls, and you know, the cost of that is going to be obscene. Well, now that we have the data from across the province, this is provincial data. The gray lines are all the houses across the province that we've collected. And it does cover all climate zones. The red and colored lines here are homes that are filtered for the top 2 steps, the highest levels of there. And as I go through this, I'm going to try and be careful of try not to tell council how to vote here. You guys can make that decision as you go, but I'll stick to the data if I can. So what we see is that most homes are actually building to these top levels with a very standard wall, the 2x6 wall with an R22 bat in it. That would be generally considered minimum practice here. Not necessarily quite minimum code, but minimum practice. If you're hiring a builder worth hiring, they're going to build you a wall at least that good. And so that's the most common wall, even at the highest levels of this code. We look at ceilings, the same thing. I'll try not to blind anybody with this laser, but R40, again, very standard way of insulating your attic. We have some lower values. Those are going to be the vaulted ceilings in there as well. And then the R50s would be mostly from the northern houses in the database. But again, very, very standard R values for homes. This is not inflating the cost at all. We see the same thing in slabs, in concrete slabs in your basement. We even see R0 on there, so that we can build to the highest levels of this code and not insulate our basement slabs at all. And that's because we can innovate on other things. We can insulate in other locations if that is more cost effective. So in summary of this, is like, how do we fail the step code? And this is really what builders, I think, are worried about, is, oh, I'm going to fail, I'm going to do this. Well, it's actually shape that is the most concern, surface area specifically. If you have lots of surface area, more heat can leak out. It's the same as the idea of doing a motorcycle engine radiator with all the little fins. More surface area, more heat leaks out. And so a mansion, beachfront mansion, lots of shape, lots of cantilevers, that's going to have a hard time. So a house like this, right, is going to have a hard time. It's got all these vaults, all this opportunity for heat to leak out. This house is going to spend a fair bit of money to meet the energy step code. The second thing on the list, and in order, it's shape, it's window position, and then way down here at the floor is how much we insulate it in terms of the priority. This house here has 75% of its windows on the north side. Maybe they have a view, I don't know, but you're not getting any free energy from the sun at that point, so we're turning away from free energy. So, this house, we threw 864 different options at this house, and it really struggles to get in there. So all of those headline horror stories that you hear are houses like this. And this is not a family struggling to afford a home. This is somebody who has chosen to spend more money, right? The kitchen island in this house actually cost more than all the insulation in the house. So, context, right? Versus this house here, family affordable housing. We threw 11,000 different options at this house, and we could not get it lower than step 4. So, here's your family housing, right? This is an easy pathway to the higher steps. Very reasonable house for a family to afford. So how hard should it be? Well, in terms of the codes, if your house looks like that, regular, normal house, we should easily be able to get there with pretty standard things of what we've been doing already. It's still the relatively cheap contractor grade windows, the regular insulations. We should be able to do that without really trying too hard, and that is proven out by the data. If your house looks like this, well, the high R values come out in that case. But again, this is somebody who has chosen to spend more money. They have that luxury of choice, and that's great for them. They can do that. They can afford the triple pane windows and things like that. But that family that just wants a roof over their house or their head, they don't need to do that. And if we're seeing the opposite of that, well, somebody's probably made a mistake at that point. Whether it's the energy consultants or something else going on in the plans, that is a mistake if we're seeing the opposite of that. So in general, in the cost terms of things, if we're talking about regular housing, the cost is zero. If we're talking about mansions, yeah, the cost is more, but that's what you get in a mansion. On the other side of things, the carbon step code, right? Energy step code deals with energy only, not emissions. And so if we're going to deal and try and meet Clean BC, then we actually do need both of them. And the question that comes out of this then is always, do we have enough power? Can BC Hydro handle this? Well, BC Hydro is predicting 15% growth by 2030. 8% of that is going to come from Site C. 5% of that came from their call to power. They actually got 3 times the amount of feedback on that call for power than they needed. So there's a lot of extra there if they want. And 2% comes from energy efficiency in buildings and other upgrades. So the other, it works out to be about 1% is coming from buildings, and that's ours. That's the energy step code, right? That's coming from this. If we have a regular house that has, you go into a cold snap, your energy use is going to spike in a cold snap, right? You're using more energy to do that. And now in a high performance house, a step 4 or 5 house, we're squishing that peak down. So now BC Hydro has to deliver way less energy. We might be delivering 971 gigawatts to it at the original house, and then cut that in half for that high performance house. So as a society, we're now spending less on our energy grid. Our energy grid doesn't need to be as robust. It doesn't need to handle these peaks. The handling the level is very easy for power companies and utilities. It's the peaks that really get us into trouble. And so a high performance house allows us to do both. And that makes then going fully electric practical. Without the energy reductions, the other parts become less practical. So a quick on the zero carbon step code here. I've got zero in quotes there because it's not actually zero. There's no such thing as zero. That's greenwashing from the province. But we'll call it this is why I usually call it carbon step code. This one is really misunderstood, and I think there's a lot of propaganda and a lot of really actually bad reporting on this out in the media right now, because it is marketed as a gas ban if you're reading the newspapers, and that is not true at all. There are 3 different categories we can choose from. Some favor small buildings, some favor large buildings, and then there's also a prescriptive pathway, which is that 3 nails per stud idea. Again, you must follow this. The prescriptive is actually the most strict, and that's the one that gets talked about a lot. But basically, no builders in this area are going to be using that. We're all going to be using the other ones, which are modeled. We use an energy model to figure out what the value is. And this is the brochure, right? And so it says we're going to decarbonize the heating systems, then we're going to decarbonize the hot water and the heating, and then we're going to decarbonize all systems. And what they mean by all systems there in the brochure is not all systems, in fact, hardly any. So let's get to that. And so there's going to be some people in the room that might say, oh, well, this is terrible. This code's really broken. And yeah, maybe you could argue that for sure. And there's also maybe some people in the room, maybe particularly builders, that are a little relieved to say, oh, I don't have to fight with my client about the fireplace. That's excellent. So there's 2 schools of thought on that. But looking at what is included and what is not is important in this, right? We include the primary heating system, supplementary heating system, sort of. So that would be a heating system like if you had a heat pump and a gas furnace there. The gas furnace would come on to help the heat pump out if it got too cold. It does not get that cold here in Qualicum Beach, so you don't actually need the supplementary heating system. But my energy model is going to say, I don't need that system, so I'm not going to turn it on. Therefore, there are 0 emissions associated with that system. The hot water tanks are counted. Redundant and backup systems are not counted at all, not even included at all. I don't have a place in my energy model to put that in. So your gas fireplace, your wood fireplace, your generators, could be a coal generator if you wanted, still not counted. Cooking and equipment are counted, and this is where the prescriptive path gets a little more strict. They are only counted in the prescriptive, and the only things the prescriptive pathway counts is cooking and laundry. You could still have patio heaters, heated driveway, heated pool, whatever you want. And so this is a game I like to play when I'm teaching step code to builders, is what energy or emissions level is this house? 1 being the lowest, 4 being the tallest. And let's run through the systems on this particular house. It's your average billionaire's house here. So we've got a heat pump as the principal heating system because that's the most comfortable and that's what we want. That's good. Great. We're starting off well. We've got a gas furnace supplementary. In Qualicum Beach, you don't really need it, but you know what? This guy's got a lot of money to spend. It'll be fine. We've got an electric hot water tank, good, low emissions system there, that's great. We've got some redundant systems, we've got a diesel generator, okay, and a gas fireplace in every room, including the walk-in closet, because, you know, I don't want to change my clothes without a gas fireplace, that's ridiculous. We've got gas cooking, gas laundry, we've got some gas heated driveway, gas barbecue, gas heated pool, gas patio heater, and a gas heated garage. Does anybody want to guess which emissions level this house is? Any takers? As you want low, you're going for like number 1 or so? Yeah, good guess, good guess. It's actually the top. This is, according to the code, this is the best you can do. And so when we hear stories of gas ban in the newspaper, it's just false. That is not true at all. You can still burn a whole lot of gas. A curtailment would be correct. That is correct. The real change is the hot water. That's the big change, is that we're phasing out gas hot water heating. Electric hot water heating is quite a bit cheaper, so, you know, council's gonna force us to use a cheaper hot water system. That's crazy. And I mean, and you can, you know, some say, well, hot water tanks run out of hot water. Well, for the price of 1 gas boiler, I can buy 3 electric hot water tanks and put them in my basement and have unlimited hot water. So it's a cheaper system no matter which way you look at it. So, you know, when it comes across as you know, we're really limiting, and of course, you know, there's going to be some folks out there in the gas industry that are going to take issue with this code, because it is a curtailment of what they're doing right now, but it is not a gas ban, and it is quite a long ways from a gas ban. And looking at the local data, where we are right now, well, we've got hot water and heating. This is Vancouver Island data. It's just sort of where we sit right now today. So right now on Vancouver Island, we are about 3/4 of the way ready for the top step with our heating systems today, and we're about 2/3 of the way with our hot water systems. So we're actually not that far off. The main reason this gas is there on the hot water system is because there was a rebate. Now there's a rebate not to do that. And this is more expensive, so I would expect within the next year or so, this is going to be almost entirely gone. Just without any, if Qualicum Council did nothing, I would expect that to be almost entirely gone. This second piece over here, this gas only, is no longer allowed. There is a different piece of the code that requires cooling, and so gas only now is effectively not allowed anymore. So what we would have is about 20% of homes that would be gas with cooling. And now, if you talk to builders, at least builders that have checked, you will find that putting an AC unit is the same cost as putting in a heat pump. An AC unit effectively is a heat pump, it just runs in one direction. And so it's the same cost. If I can get the system with the same cost, I might as well let it heat my house too, and give my client a lower energy bill as a result. So I would expect that within the next year or so, because people are figuring this out, and you know, everybody and their dog is teaching builders this, that we would expect to see some of this just switch over to heat pump entirely, and some of it maybe to go to dual energy for those that aren't quite ready to cut that gas cord yet. And that dual energy there, even though there is a gas heater in that system, it is still compliant with the top level. Even if we were in Fort St. John and we were using that gas heater a lot, it would still be compliant with the top level. So going into the future here, the types of changes that we're going to see to houses are actually quite simple, they are quite small, and they are low cost. The houses that look like this with the windmills and the solar panels all over them, this is sci-fi stuff. This is not what we're expecting out of these codes. And it's just kind of silliness. The houses that we're going to see are the same ones that are down the street here. You know, a lot of those are probably already getting into the higher steps. Certainly, I know because we work on them, the new houses around in the area are. And we built one just over the hill in Courtenay there not too long ago. That was a step 5 house. house, top level of the carbon step code, and it was $10,000 cheaper than the houses around it. And so it's absolutely possible. A lot of our clients are doing that, and that's sort of where the data lies. You'll see some propaganda from various political parties and stuff to the contrary, despite our regular interactions there, that information has not been received. So happy to take questions and any discussions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Bernard. Questions? Councillor Harris.
Thank you very much. So I spend a lot of time talking to people in the nonprofit sector, and when they talk about BC housing projects, there's significant cost escalation. It's not related to this. It's because BC has a very prescriptive approach to thou shalt use this particular feature in this particular part of your building. So it's not quite the same. But when I talk to them, folks who are local, like the folks who are building the affordable housing project in town, they do say for the 5-step for like single family homes, step 4 is easy and we should absolutely be doing that. I think we do as a town already, I think.
We're on step 3 as far as last I checked.
Okay, because I know step 3 is a provincial requirement. I can't remember if as a council we said should try to do step 4. But step 5 is very difficult to do. And then I'm not sure about the multifamily, the 4-step step code for that.
Yeah, just to make it more complicated, the big buildings have 4 steps and the small buildings have 5. The reason is the big building builders said, well, you know, we're doing a lot of this stuff already. We don't need as many increments. The small building builders wanted a smaller stair. And so I think it depends on how you do it, right? So I agree the BC Housing type of projects, and our development company, all we're building for the next 5 years is affordable subsidized housing. And so, yeah, we have the receipts on that. The BC housing requirements are higher. The reason for that is because they or a nonprofit is owning that building. And so the cost of putting in a more durable building at the start is significantly less than the cost of not doing it. And so that there is some upfront cost there for sure, but they are unrelated to this code. Most of the BC housing projects that we see and test around here are actually well beyond the step 5 range or the step 4 range in terms of big buildings. You know, on the small building side, as far as the cost escalation between step 4 and 5, it's often not zero, but it's only that way when we haven't practiced yet, because it's not something you learn overnight. Particularly with the design of homes, the design of home needs to change a little bit, right? We need to tighten up that surface area a little bit. For the last decade or so, we've cantilevered and we've done this and we've done that. Side note: any zoning bylaws or design guidelines from the communities could really use a little review to make sure that we're not discouraging compact form houses. So if we build a compact form house, which the house that I was mentioning there that was $10,000 cheaper is in the Marigot subdivision just down the highway here, and I challenge you to drive by and figure out which house it is. Chances are you won't be able to tell. And so if we design houses like that, we can do it. The challenge between, like, step 4 is pretty easy. Step 3 is basic standard building. Step 5 does require a design change. And if we can get our minds around that design change, which does not cost anything, then we can do step 5 at no cost. If we take a regular design that we've been doing for the last 20 years and try and add insulation to it, as soon as we start adding insulation to it, that's when the costs go through the roof.
And just to clarify too, that is the exact conversation I've heard with like local builders is that,
yeah,
oh my God, the insulation is going to go through the roof and everything is very expensive now.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, and if we change the design, we're good. We can do it without cost. So and I think where council has input there is on those design guidelines and what you're encouraging for community plans and things like that. And if we can encourage that compact form, which is still beautiful, then we can do very well.
And just to follow up, if I may, so Qualicum Beach is quite addicted to cantilevered and all sorts of articulation. This is very much Qualicum Beach's style, what we like to see a lot. So is this something where maybe council might have a role in talking to the community and sort of giving people a little bit of time to get used to the idea of what a more efficient building looks like?
I think definitely. I mean, other cities have started that pathway as well. You sort of have to change the culture, right, in some ways. And if we're talking about mansions and like the beachfront places and stuff, they're fine. They can spend the money, and those people are going to get the triple pane windows. Those people can do whatever they want, and they've always been able to do whatever they want. And they can still do whatever they want. But if we're talking about, the family housing, that's where we're really going to need to tighten it up. And again, back to those zoning guidelines or the design guidelines, if we have have requirements for glazing and things like that are counterproductive for us, perhaps. The great example I like to use is from Victoria, where the Dockside Green development, which was supposed to be, super sustainable, had requirements for the building to basically be entirely glass. Very counterproductive for air conditioning and things like that. And so those sorts of silly things, if we can review those bylaws and stuff and take that sort of thing out. We still want windows, like we still want to be able to see the street and things like that. We're not talking about windowless boxes. That is not what we're designing here. Anything we can do there to encourage, certainly. And it is a slow culture change, I think.
And just one last thing, just through the chair to Mr. Sales. As we're doing our OCP review, is this something that maybe we'll be talking about as part of that? Because I think it would be germane when we're doing our OCP update mandated by the province to also talk about energy efficiency at the same time.
Yes, thank you. Through the chair to Councillor Harrison. When the town incorporated design guidelines into the changes associated with Bill 44, so the new zoning bylaw 900 does have design guidelines, and energy efficiency was specifically referenced because that is kind of the next stage in the discussion around design guidelines. So at some point, I don't know for sure whether it will be next year or in some future iteration, the town's village design guidelines should be reviewed with a lens to ensuring that those design guidelines don't conflict with the town's goal of increasing energy efficiency. So you are right to highlight it. It should be reviewed at some point. Whether it happens within the 1-year time frame for the next OCP review remains to be determined, but it is on the list. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harrison. Any other comments, questions? All right. Well, thank you for your presentation.
Yeah, thank you for your time.
And clarifying some of these issues. I had one question. When you say you can't see the difference, can't you see the difference when people put more solar panels up and that kind of thing?
Oh, I suppose you could, yeah. Solar panels are fun, and we like doing solar panels. All of our projects have solar panels. The reason we're putting on the roof is for marketing, because people love buying solar panels. But these codes do not require solar panels. In fact, they're not counted at all. And the main reason for that is a building code needs to be fair and evenly enforceable. And so if we allowed solar panels to be counted, then somebody living on the south side of the mountain could get away with anything. And somebody living on the north side of the mountain who had no access to solar would be in real trouble. And so in these building codes, we actually ignore the mountains, the trees, and the neighbor's house. And so it's all evenly enforceable. And for that reason, we don't account for renewables on the specific house. Although I will say, there is a rebate for putting renewables on your house right now. So it's good fun. My house is covered in solar panels.
I kind of expected that.
Yeah.
Thank you for your presentation.
Yeah, thank you.
So, Mr. Sales, when we do our next step, so to speak, is what you just explained earlier. So we'll wait till we get a recommendation from staff to proceed with this step code situation. Thank you. Next, we have the zoning amendment and development permit for First Avenue and Beach. Who's going to speak to that first? Mr. Sales.
Thank you, Mayor Westbrook. The town has received an application for a development proposal at 201, 207, and 211 First Avenue West. The proposal is a 5-story mixed-use building with ground floor commercial and residential above. So as Mr. Holland mentioned earlier, it has been identified through the development review process that having an opportunity for an applicant to directly present their proposal to council and having an opportunity for council to interact with the developer and ask questions is very beneficial to the overall process. So that's why we are here today, is to make sure you have the time for a fulsome discussion directly with the applicant and their agents. I do want to clarify, because there's a bit of confusion around the public input and why it's appropriate in some cases and not others. So the province has mandated that local governments cannot have public hearings for development proposals that are residential, predominantly residential, and where the proposal is compliant with the official community plan. They have also indicated to municipalities that municipalities should steer away from anything that looks or seems like a public hearing. So in other words, shadow public hearings, like fake public hearings, are not to be held. And so that's the risk, and that's why the town has been advised by our legal counsel to avoid scenarios where maybe in a public forum like this, a committee of the whole setting, it's functioning like a public hearing. So that's why there's a recommendation before you today that, council, this is your meeting, your chance to interact with the developer or the proposal. At some point in the future, if this does proceed, the applicant will need to have a public information meeting. That's a part of the town's development process, and that's the opportunity for the public to interact directly with the developer. So that's why there's no opportunity for public input today. If we had, in quotes, a fake public hearing, it could put the town in a vulnerable position later on, in terms of the integrity of the overall development process. So with that, I'll hand it back to you, and I'd love to hear from the applicants. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sales. So who would like to start from the applicant side?
Well, good morning, Mayor Westbrook and Council. My name is Bruce McClay. I'm the applicant to build this building, and I've built many buildings around the Parksville area, the Shoppers Drug Mart. We had Craig Bay Development, and we've done many other buildings in the Parksville area. Unfortunately, I've never done anything in Qualicum, but I build a good building. I'm always proud of my buildings, and my buildings are very efficient. The one I did in Parksville, Ocean Terrace, it's a 42-unit apartment block. And the people are saying their fee is costing them less than $30 a month for all their utilities, which is unbelievable. Anyways, I built lots of apartment blocks in Victoria, and also down in Tennessee. I've built lots of things. But I'm looking forward to building something really nice in Qualicum here, and I think we'll all be proud of it. Anyways, that's all I can say. I'll pass you on to my consultants. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor and Council.
Yes, good afternoon or morning, I guess, Your Worship.
Pull it
Mayor.
down a bit if you want.
There, am I clear?
Yeah.
And Qualicum Beach Council. My name is Chris Gower. I'm the architect for the project. I'm also an urban design planner. And I did want to mention that we have a team here. We've had quite a concerted team working on the project closely with Bruce. Bruce has definitely done a terrific amount of groundwork for this, this proposal. So I think I'll just point out a few people. I think we have John Kay is an architect helping us. Brian Kendricks, a co-designer. Ray Hunt is a specialist in medical facilities designs. So we've all been working on the project for going on 2 years. So there's quite a bit of groundwork that we'll see through the presentation. This, I hope, will be a concise, as complete as we can be, presentation, and then we'll be open to questions afterwards. Also, our landscape architect, Julian Waring, is here to further answer questions as well. So here we are. So the first thing that struck us when Bruce engaged us was the opportunity of the site. The site, I think you all know, it's due for new development. It also has very interesting kind of geographic opportunities because of the slope of the site. And you'll see we've been able to really develop a kind of a collaborative combination of uses on the site. Now, our client, Bruce, was very early encouraged to consider multiple use development, including housing, rental housing, and including a potential medical clinic. So that was quite an interesting challenge. It's a new type of opportunity, but, oops. Your OCP is very complementary for these uses. The site opportunely is adjacent to your key core area. It's identified in your current OCP for a mixed use. It's foreseen, I think, as a transition from your commercial core to your residential areas. So coming up with a project that kind of suited the opportunities presented in your OCP was a key objective of us. We lost an image here, but we also, in this image that's lost, we wanted to show how proximate the site is to all the many amenities you have in your town center, the shopping and recreational amenities. The site is highly pedestrian accessible and walkable. Now, the nature of the site as well presented a good occasion to combine a lot of types of access to the site. To solve the layout of the building, we really had to consider the circulation and access. We have included the use of a lower level that we'll see for the primary parking and the medical clinic. The site slopes up to grade on First Avenue, where we've got a combination of a primary entrance to the residential uses plus a commercial use on the corner of the building oriented to the downtown. Access isn't just vehicular and pedestrian-oriented and cycling and so on. We also have to be concerned about emergency vehicle access. So the red markings here show potential firefighting and emergency access. We have included in this proposal the development of a public lane in the properties immediately to the west of the site, which also gives us a big boost in terms of the accessibility and firefighting ability for the site. So the yellow diagram shows the potential residential uses on the main floor, and then in the lower right we see a commercial accent sort of more oriented to your downtown. The other key kind of interest of the development is making sure it was well framed with landscape features, and one of the key opportunities was to actually develop the building roughly in a U-shaped site with an open garden courtyard as part of the entry landscaping on the project. So you'll see that as we work through the images. Our landscape architect will speak in more detail when questions arise on the landscape plan. But again, it's very important for this combination of uses to be well set off with good site landscaping and with a variety of types of public spaces to suit the multitude of kind of different types of uses that the building would enjoy. Landscaping and water management on site are very key factors for sustainability, for the the livability of the project, but also in terms of sort of dealing with the extremes of weather conditions that climate change is leading to. So our landscape plans have been developed to really offset the extremes of climate. And our landscape architect will be able to kind of give you quite a bit more detail in the range of plantings that are anticipated in the project to be diverse, climate tolerant, both for hot, dry summers, which we're getting more of, and also for extreme winter weather and cold. So I'll just talk a bit about this plan on the lowest level. So our lowest level is a concrete structure, which is generally below grade through most of the site. It allows us for accommodating about 42 residential parking stalls within a secure area, a gated area, which is a pretty good parking count. Also bicycle storage and scooter secure storage within that. I think I mentioned the emphasis of the project being an orientation for rental housing, and all the transportation features of the cars that are allowed, bicycle and scooter facilities, but also the walkability of the building are really great amenities for the residential use. Now, the other opportunity, because of the sloping site, was to plant the medical clinic facility at the lower level within the concrete structure. Because of the slope down Beach Road, we actually have a street frontage on the lower corner of the site, and we're indicating with the just get my more pointer going here. Yes, the red entry points, we've indicated potential primary entries to the medical clinic facility. Our medical facility specialist will talk about a bit more detail on the layout. We'll get to that later. But we're also able to include a courtyard with dedicated parking for the medical clinic, which is just generally in this area. So this is assigned parking directly adjacent to the medical clinic. You can drive in and then park, and then come in the lower entry here, or you can have a walking access off the street here. And of course, there's also excellent transit right at hand, very opportune location for the transit. So I'll let Brian just talk a little bit about the plans. and their details. I'll just mention, again, it's a rental facility, so we do have the efficiency of 2-bedroom units that are repeated through the plans. Very good for functionality of a rental facility, and other uses. Brian?
Which
This one does everything.
okay, does it have a pointer on it?
Has a pointer at the front.
Okay, and that's fast forward. Okay, thank you very much. Thanks, Chris. Good morning, Mayor and Council. My name is Brian Kendrick. I'm Chris's design associate. What I just want to do right now is just walk you up through the building and illustrate how each individual floor footprint has an influence on the massing of the building and how that massing is intended to step back principally from First Avenue West and step back from Beach Road to create a bit of a cascading roof effect. So the main floor, we have all the residential in yellow. These are units that are nominally about 900 square foot in unit. They're 2-bedroom units. All have been designed to follow the most current adaptable housing guidelines. So we have the cluster of, I think we have 14 units here, and our clinic and other, hopefully clinic and other allied professional uses that will relate to the clinic below, pharmacy and possibly some medical testing. And we've also been looking at how the 2 floors can interact from one to the other. As Chris has pointed out, we've got a courtyard here which buffers the relationship to the street, so that the street frontage is there and broken by our courtyard. As we go up one floor, it is now all residential, and we have a greater number of residential units. We have largely the same massing on the second floor as the first. And as we go up to the 3rd floor, again, we're starting to cut back. Oops, I'm using the wrong. We're starting to cut back the massing on this corner as we go up through the building. Each floor has some degree of residential amenity, community amenity. Like we have possibly auxiliary laundry, or that can be a meeting room. We've got a number of uses anticipated for that. As we go up now, you see how we've now chopped back this corner. This corner only goes up 3 floors. And we've chopped back this whole corner here and provided for the residents a community room and an outdoor residential community activity terrace. And we've knocked back the number of units on that particular floor. As we go up to the top floor, now we've completely sculpted the corner back to the core so that we've really buffered back this side and buffered back this side. So you can start to get an idea of how, as we rise up through the building, the footprints of each floor shrink and provide us with an opportunity to create a cascading effect. So the top one is First Avenue West. And you can see that's the 3-story, and then it climbs up to 4, then it climbs up to the 5, then it cascades back down the other side. The same thing as if you're looking at it from the north side, you can see how all the roof lines cascade up and then cascade back down again. Here we are, like for instance, on the beach side. You can see how it all cascades up. And this is a lower level cascading up to the upper level, to the highest levels. So pretty much at most every important interface with the street, we've taken efforts to soften the frontage and cascade the massing of the building up. So applied to that, we now are looking at, okay, how does this building want to present itself to the public in terms of its finishes and character? And you may notice that what we've done is we've divided our architectural style into 2 segments. One is the residential, which we've tried to keep fairly consistent with the town of Qualicum Beach's residential guidelines in terms of finishes and forms and pitched roofs, etc. And then when we get to the corner, which is commercial and relates to down here, wraps around down to the clinic. We want that to be a more solid representation of something that is visibly non-residential and deliberately a little bit more commercial looking and a little bit more solid as it represents itself and presents itself to the intersection. And at the intersection, we're also looking to create a bit of a community corner, community terrace there with maybe some kind of a coffee bar associated with the pharmacy. Maybe, Chris, you want to talk about some of the aerials there?
Yeah, thank you, Brian. So I think Brian really put his finger on the opportunity form for this building. It is a transitional site which kind of reaches in one direction towards the commercial core of your town. And as Brian said, we've kind of given a emphasis that's close street frontage with a stone facing and a small terrace here, public terrace, which orients and leads you to the town center. So that's very much reaching out to become part of your downtown core. But at the same time, we've got a residential language that kind of relates to the surrounding residential uses. So it's kind of a hybrid, mixed kind of expression for the building, which I think adds to its complexity. The other key factors are that we did want to not overload your primary kind of public street faces, which are along First Avenue and along Beach. So the building very deliberately steps back from both those faces. And so we have two lower scale wings for the project, fronting the street, keeping in scale, kind of nice pedestrian scale, and we've got concentrated the residential kind of units kind of in that center block, and we have really made a feature which is a private outdoor area for the occupants of the building. It's a gated little landscape courtyard. But at the same time, it's a public offering of landscaping to the town as a whole. We did go through earlier schemes, and we were kind of responding to suggestions about this orientation of the building. So there's been quite a bit of good input on the project, I would say. The lane, we'll talk about the opportunity of the lane as well. Again, fronting the street with a variety of building forms as well. We didn't want a simple boxing building. We picked up on the Qualicum Beach design guidelines for sloping roofs, for residential kind of bays. So we've got that in a kind of quiet contemporary form. But it helps scale the building down and express it as a community of occupants. The other key amenities for the residents are the outdoor terraces. So we concentrated those facing south, facing southeast with views of the downtown. These are community terraces that would relate to the use of the residential occupants. I think we mentioned there's 57 planned residential rental units in this building, and we think socially it's quite important to have common areas. They're of good amenity. Also, a really important community feature of the building is allowing for public space, particularly the small terrace and what we call an arcade, which is a walkway that feeds the main floor level shops and commercial uses. So the building be highly accessible for pedestrian use and welcoming, I think. So our central landscape courtyard, again, it's for the occupants' use primarily, but it's part of the entry sequence to the building, and it gives the public a really nice view of the compatibility and the ability for the residents to enjoy the outdoors as part of the lifestyle of the building. We've included a lot of planning for bicycles throughout the development. I think we can't speak enough about the alternate transportation opportunities of the site being this close to your downtown, walkable, travelable by scooter, wheelchair, also bicycles. So we've allowed in planning a lot of facilities for bike racking and as well as the secure occupants bike storage at the lowest level. The lane on the side of the project on the west side, Bruce is very intent on developing this as a public amenity, which would have uses for cyclists, for pedestrians walking, but also for emergency vehicles and accessible vehicles. Development of the lane on this side of the west side of the property can continue right through the block eventually, which would be a benefit to the adjacent properties further to the west and also properties further down the slope to the northeast. So I think the lane is a key way to flank the building and kind of give us, you know, very good circulation within your pedestrian and cycling networks. Now, the building will kind of contribute to the streetscape. So this is a view down First Avenue looking east. And we have a rendered image showing the way the building has scaled itself down to front onto the street with this multitude of different factors, the residential wings, the courtyard, and also commercial use on that corner. So we really are aiming to create lively and enjoyable streetscapes from the project. Ray Hunt, I'm going to invite up here. We'll speak in detail about the planning for the medical clinic. I will mention that the totality of this project depends very much on a complementary quotient of residential development to support the development of the clinic. But the clinic, I think, functions very well here, and you'll see that we're on First Avenue, on Beach Avenue here. It's actually at a street access level, and it's not a back door, it's kind of a side door to the overall development. Ray?
Thanks very much. Morning, Mayor, members of council. My background is as an architect and planner, and more recently with healthcare facilities. Now, Chris, could you fire up a plan of the clinic?
What's next?
Thank you. The development includes the proposal for a clinic, and it's set up around the clinic in that area. It isn't just a vacant space empty of cars. It's been the structure's set up for it, the ceiling heights, etc. So the proposal is to include enough space for 6 doctors or 6 healthcare professionals and 12 patients. So it's a reasonable size clinic plus the support rooms. It's got very good access, pedestrian, vehicle and emergency health services. We, at a previous meeting, a paramedic was talking about how do you access an ambulance on the odd occasion, which is an odd occasion, but we even looked at that level of detail. It could be the clinic could be a traditional family practice, which is the doctor's clinic, but it could also be a sort of a wider facility, a community health center with a full range of professionals like...
Please address the chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. It could have a wider range of professionals, or it even could be what's called an urgent primary healthcare center. Now, that would have to be funded by Island Health, but that's just one step away from really emergency department. So the layout of the clinic has got a potential from doctor's clinic, community health center, even an urgent primary healthcare center. It would be available either for a non-profit or private, salaried doctors, fee-for-service doctors. So that is the potential. It could be owned or it could be leased. So there's a wide range for those who are interested, and it's set up to the current standard, which is CSA Z8000, but that's for healthcare facilities. So that relates to special ventilation, etc. It's just not an old or a typical setup with rooms. It has a very specific design. The City of Colwood recently, and we wish them the best of luck, has set up a proposal for a facility. They will provide a doctor's facility. They'll also pay for salaried doctors, which is unusual, and the MOAs, and they'll also provide the administration from the council offices to the clinic. And I say, we wish them the best of luck. But in this instance, the developer is offering the potential for that with the building for somebody who wants to take on that responsibility. On this upper level, so it's on the lower level, the upper level, there's a potential for the physio, medical lab. It could be even a yoga center. We provided a clinic up island for a doctor, actually a practice, and he has a multi-purpose room with yoga as well as other activities, and he felt that was all part of the facility. This has that option. It has an elevator connection. So it's almost a two-level menu of facilities. We did meet with the Mid-Island Division of Family Practice, and two of the doctors were very enthusiastic, but it comes down to how we're going to fund it with the current arrangement. But as I say, we did have support at that level, but it hasn't gone further than that at the moment. So basically, here's a proposal, and it includes a clinic with the potential to help you solve the lack of doctors in town. And yes, the developer would be very interested if you would support this, and that's the conclusion. Thank you very much, Your Worship.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ray. So I can't say more about Ray's experience. He is very active, continuing as a consultant on a number of medical-oriented projects up and down the island, and he will continue with us as the details of the clinic are kind of, we've given a very good example of a clinic layout, but we expect that there'll be evolution of the clinic as it takes form. So I did, again, want to commend Bruce for taking on the site, which has great opportunity, and for being encouraged to look at a comprehensive building, which includes a good quotient of rental accommodation, a very opportune location in your town center, but also allows us to kind of help frame your downtown with a commercial use. And opportunity knocks, I think, on this site, particularly for the clinic in combination with the housing. So we're here for further discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yes.
We have one of our other friends here, Wolf Atchison, who's been very, very effective in kind of setting the stage and the climate for this proposal. Wolf, please.
Okay, thank you. Your Worship, council members, my name is Wolf Isaacson. I am a town resident. I'm a realtor locally. I've been involved in real estate for 37 years. I've done dozens and dozens and dozens of developments. Built the largest movie studios in Burnaby for Canada. What we have here is a project that I don't think will be reproduced in my lifetime. You have an opportunity here by a man who's willing to give a lot more to the town of Qualicum than meets the eye. No one's going to build a building like this with 900 square foot units. No one's going to build a medical center that's offered like this. It's just not going to happen. If something was to happen to this man, this development, before it got built, it would be washed. I can tell you that with all the developers I deal with, they will not support it. It's too expensive, too much time, and too much from a person that has to give. It's just not going to happen. To give you an example, to build a medical center could be $500, $600 a square foot. A commercial unit would be $150. So how many people are going to do that? This thing became very personal for me 2 years ago. My daughter, we moved here, no medical. She became pregnant, and no doctor would accept her from Nanaimo to Courtenay. I had to phone the ministry. I had to complain. They had to get involved. And I found out that no pregnant women are allowed to be denied by doctors, thank God. At that point, I realized that there's something horribly wrong with our medical system in this area, probably in BC in general, but for us for sure. So when I had the opportunity of this property, I sat down with Bruce and we came up with a plan with your planner to offer the town this facility, this medical facility. So I'm here today to tell you that I don't believe this will be offered again. It's a one-shot deal, and I'm asking you to seriously, seriously consider passing this project. We all need this medical facility here. You know that, and everyone I've talked to, I've met with lots and lots of people. I'm still meeting with people that will help engage in hiring doctors, the VIHA. The potential here is unlimited for us to grow. So I'm asking you to please consider passing this. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions from Council? Councilor Harrison.
Just through the chair to staff. So normally, committee of the whole, folks could come up to the microphone. We're not doing this because of the new legislation. But just to clarify through the chair to staff, if citizens wanted to send us an email saying, this is what I think about this, is that still okay?
Thank you. Through the chair to Councilor Harrison, written input is welcome at any time. It can be sent directly to the town hall through the email system. You can drop off a letter at the town hall anytime. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. Just to clarify for citizens that they feel there's a bit of a change. But I do have a couple questions, if that's okay.
Go ahead, ask one more.
Okay, and also recognize two members of the Perfect Storm group I see. I see Suzanne and Marlis are in the back. Is this something, just maybe through the chair to the proponents, at the end of the day, things have to make some degree of financial sense, right? You can't just say, provide us a medical clinic and nothing else, and that's lovely. If there were some way we could collaborate to try to find external funding, would this something where that might change sort of the built structure that you're looking at?
Who would like to take that on? The lead architect, I think, would be to start with.
This is the proposal that we've worked on, I guess, with consultation over the last 2 years. We think it's achievable, practical. It gives enough impetus and sort of financial capability to consider the clinic kind of being designed in itself. We're sticking to the proposal we've been kind of working to develop. You know, our client has really invested a considerable amount of preparation for this, and he's quite confident about the prospect of this. We have done engagements with structural, mechanical, geotechnical, and civil, so we know it's a very buildable site. So this is kind of a good manifestation of the intentions of the project, I think, as it stands. Thank you.
All right. I'll ask if somebody else wants to ask a question. Anybody else have a question? Councilor Young.
I noticed that you mentioned you've spoken to a few doctors already. Do we have some sort of surety from these doctors that we will get the doctors when the clinic is built? Because we have Division of Family Practice through Island Health trying to recruit doctors for us, but still, you know, we haven't had much success. So are you offering some extra incentives to make sure that we're going to get the doctors in your clinic?
Chris,
Ray will come up and speak to that. He knows the climate very well for medical facilities up and down the island. But something I think I glossed over a little bit, Bruce is intending to offer 2 suites for doctors' use with subsidized rental rates. So we definitely want to make this as appealing to doctors as possible. We also see it's such a prime prospect for a medical clinic that we have a lot of confidence it's going to draw attention from medical practitioners. Ray.
Thank you. Just actually, Chris took part of my thunder, as it were, because there were 2 subsidized suites there for doctors and other health professionals. But in talking to Mid-Island Health, the practices, they've found funds, considerable funds for a new project in Alberni. I'm just suggesting it really sort of wasn't up to the developer to really push them, because he invited them and they showed interest. But then they said, what about the money? But we do know with the present government that Island Health has put funds out, and they've put one out recently for an Indigenous group in Port Alberni. So they saw a need there, and that would have doctors. So I'm just suggesting that if everyone could push in that direction and see if that Central Island practice has some idea of funding, because we had heard there was substantial funds. This is last year. Now, I have asked directly the Island Health Authority. I have somebody I know very well in there, and there isn't a plan at this minute to fund a doctor's clinic in Qualicum Beach. And I asked him, what's the funding? There's different funds. But I mean, it doesn't stop it being budgeted in the future. So I think it comes down to local pressure as well, because it did work in Alberni from a project we've heard about. So that's all I can answer is will it happen? Well, it comes down to, local efforts, I think, to some extent. But we did try anyway and spread the word out. Yes, thank you, Your Worship.
Councillor Van der Valk.
Can I just add to that?
Sure.
As a realtor, I just want to let you know that I take out medical professionals to look at space here in Parksville. And recently, as of last week, I have a group here from America that wants to set up several clinics for the higher end equipment, the MRIs, the stuff that we have to wait for a long time for, 6 months, 9 months for. That's something that this building would entertain on the second floor, or the additional spaces, something that we could really use. And these people I come across quite often. The key to note is what they want is a new building, a building that actually has the power, the design, and the capability of housing what they want to offer. Most of the buildings, note, in Parksville and Qualicum are older buildings and don't really offer what they want. So that's what I'm saying. This building being built, they will come. We will get them. It will happen. And I'm working with people to make that happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Van der Valk.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. It's interesting to see what you are hoping to accomplish. I think that we do need to not lose sight of the fact that this is essentially a residential development. And yes, it may include a medical facility, a medical clinic, but the project overall is a residential project. And my questions are based mostly on how it fits in with our community, what's in our OCP, what requirements we have, and that will be my particular slant on it. So I have quite a few questions. I'll do a couple and then you can come back to me. I've broken it down into the suites, the proposed clinic, and the parking. And I do appreciate what you have pointed out in terms of your design, how you've stepped it back so that it's not so, it fits in better with the streetscape. I do appreciate those design considerations that you have made. The main problem that I see is it's just too darn big. You're asking for 6 stories, where the OCP has said 3 stories. And it doesn't really relate to anything that's around it. So it's a very huge, massive structure that you've tried to work the massing so it's a little more amenable to the street, but still it's a very large structure. You're asking for 6 stories, essentially, and at the back it's pretty much a solid wall. Most of your massing is happening on the 2 streets, on First Avenue and on Beach. And at the back, if I read your plans correctly, you're asking for a height to the top of the roof of 81.525 meters, which is, if I calculated it properly, for does it say me? Oh, okay. Is it in feet? Is it in metric?
You're looking at the statistics, I think. I don't have them right at hand.
I don't have the page number that we're on, that I'm on, but.
Okay, just a second, one at a time. Councillor Mr. Sales.
Thank you, Mayor Westbrook. Just to clarify, there are elevations noted in the drawings. that are referenced from geodetic elevation. So geodetic elevation relates to mean sea level. It doesn't relate to the height of land at the building site. So that does come up as an often a source of confusion in plans. So if it says 80 meters, that doesn't mean that the building is 80 meters tall. It means that it's 80 meters from that reference sea level point. So a little bit of a subtraction is required, but the heights are noted in the plan summary in the statistics there. Thank you.
Okay.
Just a second. Councillor Van Valk, the heights are on page 3 of your agenda package.
Okay. So is that the height to the top of the roof?
17.17, that's what it looks like. Right there.
Okay. Okay. Nonetheless, it's very high. So, you've answered some of the questions that I have had.
What are you saying?
Now, you talk about your roofs, how you've sloped them and tried to have them fit into, this is on the residential part, slope them and try and have them fit into design guidelines. But the roofs seem unnecessary to have that higher roof because you have a lot of roof space in there that really isn't doing much. So I would question that. And for the residents, you have 57 suites, but only 42 parking stalls, where on your parking, you've said that you have 1 per suite. So there seems to be a discrepancy there. And those are pretty much my questions about the suites.
We'll try and answer the questions raised by Councillor Van Valk, and then we'll move on to Councillor Skipsey and back to Councillor Harrison. Go ahead, sir.
Very good questions. There's an inaccuracy here in the summary. We're not proposing 1 space per unit. What is anticipated is there'll be some shared parking and some use of alternate transportation. We still have a pretty good ratio for 57 suites. We got 42 assigned parking spaces tied to the suites. So this is a trend, I think, in planning that parking allowances are diminishing a little bit. We still think this has quite a good ample amount of parking. Plus, the location of the building is so suited to pedestrian use and transit. We don't see this as going to be an issue. I think that people will be able to use the building quite effectively with this level of parking and those other features. The roof line and the height. We haven't talked enough about sustainability. I'm an advocate of sloped roofs, particularly in their ability to shield buildings from intensive heat. And having a capped attic is very effective in resisting kind of the extremes of hot weather. As anyone in a house with a sloped roof knows, especially if you've got a vented roof, it really does relieve a lot of the impact of the sun. It also really helps as well with dealing with the other extreme of climate, heavy snow and rain as well. So we think it's a good, sustainable kind of architectural feature in the building, as well as relating to the residential design guidelines that are in place in your municipality. So that's kind of what we've done.
Thank you. Councillor Skipsey.
If I may just add, the secondary purpose of a roofscape like that is it does give us opportunity to be able to provide adequately for mechanical systems, be they mechanical units or transfer ductworks going back and forth within the building. So it's very, very useful space, as Chris has described, and it's very, very useful space and almost needed space for mechanical distribution.
Okay, thank you very much for your presentation. I wasn't able to make any, I understand you had a couple of presentations with the public, and I'm sorry I wasn't able to attend in either of those. I've been around long enough that I've seen several iterations for this property, and the first time it came forward was actually in 2017, and it was actually a 5-property conglomeration. Since then, the bottom 2 lots on Beach have been divided up and sold off. But that original proposal that came forward was a 4-story, it was 34 units for all 5 properties. And it was sent back before it received any first reading or anything, saying that 4 stories was too high. And that was, I think, at 15.8 meters, 18.6 meters in one spot. It then came back in 2020, and again, it was for 2 4-story buildings, and it said that the council of the day thought it was too boxy, the massing of the structures was too large, and it didn't fit the character of Qualicum Beach. So I just wanted to bring that kind of background history. I'm not sure if people are aware of that for this property. However, having said all that, this part of the property was always identified as the piece that would have the most density. And so I am very thankful of the consideration that's been given to the height and trying to reduce some of the impact of that. The step backs, love that. I like the amenities and the common areas, the public spaces that have been proposed, the outdoor terraces. I think it would be nice to have outdoor terraces so you could see the view. Not just of the town, the village core, but perhaps of the ocean. And I haven't talked to Councillor Van der Valk about this, but I too am concerned about the massing on the north side. So that sheer height, there's been no effort, as far as I can see, to kind of reduce the impact of that big wall. And when I looked at the shadow study, there's times of the year where the buildings below will have no light during parts of the day. So that's definitely a concern for me. The other thing is the 5 parking spots for the clinic. I really question whether that's enough. If there's going to be 6 doctors there, that could be all the parking gone, because we know that people like to park right where they work. So I am concerned about that. I didn't see any parking for the commercial area. I might be mistaken. And just the comment about getting doctors, yes, it takes local effort, but there also may be some politics involved, as we sometimes know. Anyways, I think I'll leave that, my comments for now.
Thank you. Councillor Harrison, then back to Councillor Young.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. So another thing is there's an upcoming building code change coming up, I believe, in about 6 months to a year. Which has significantly higher requirements for accessibility. I am seeing folks nodding their heads. So depending on when this project gets submitted, it may... Adaptability. Okay, yeah, the adaptability, yeah. Okay. It's there. Okay, so I just wanted to check that because, last thing you want to do is have the plans and then you submit it 1 month after royal assent and then suddenly you have to redo your plans because it's no longer code compliant. The other thing too, I just want to point out that for folks, it's really important sometimes to read our OCP in its entirety, not just select parts of it. So when you look at the OCP in its current iteration, the 2018 OCP, when it talks about the village neighborhood area, I'm just going to read out the whole policy because it's important, I think, for folks to get the whole thing. Buildings should be a maximum of 3 stories in height. However, the town may consider taller buildings on a case-by-case basis with consideration of factors such as topography, solar access, compatibility with adjacent uses, neighborhood impact, views, and community amenities. The town will also recognize increases in typical ceiling heights in the consideration of height limits. So the question isn't 3 stories or bust. It's if you're going to go over 3 stories, well, then there's a checklist of things we need to look at. So I just want to highlight that because some folks in our community think that it's 3 stories is a hard limit. 3 stories, just you're automatically fine. That's all. Those are 2 sort of different things. But I think that we desperately need more medical care. Folks are very much clamoring for that. That's definitely the feedback I've heard from multiple people who are involved in different political parties in this provincial election who are going around door knocking. That is by far the biggest issue, what they hear at the door from citizens. So I hope there's a way we can actually see an improvement in that service. I know we're going to get a lot of feedback from email, which is okay. Just if folks feel strongly about this, please do send us emails. Yeah, this is something where there's potential, and I got a hunch there might be some conversation in the future.
Thank you, Councillor Harrison. Councillor Young.
Just adding on to fellow Councillor Ann Skipsey, I'm also concerned about the doctor and patient parking. I just don't think there is enough there. Also, I'm wondering, have you done a traffic feasibility study? Because this is density, and we've in the past, even for smaller developments, we've had the local neighborhood complain about, oh my gosh, it's a big impact on traffic, it's just not going to be safe. So have you done a traffic study? And I'm wondering to our Luke Sales, if is there some DCC that we'll be receiving for traffic lights and that kind of thing on this project?
I'll let Mr. Seal answer first.
Thank you, Mayor Westbrook. My understanding is that a traffic impact analysis hasn't been developed at this time. I think, as we heard earlier from the delegation, there are multiple types of traffic impact assessments that can be done. So I think as this project progresses through the review process, we would be ensuring that the appropriate level of traffic assessment is completed. In answer to your second question, this area is included in the area where the DCC reduction bylaw would apply. So depending on what areas of that DCC reduction bylaw they comply with, the amount of DCC reduction would vary. So yes, and you asked about applicability to traffic lights and things like that. DCCs apply to specific projects that were identified as community needs when the DCC bylaw was developed, and so there's major projects identified, but municipalities can't use DCC bylaws for ongoing capital expenses like streetlight upgrades unless it's identified in that bylaw. So just to clarify that, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Young. I agree with the parking is a huge issue in Qualicum Beach. People are looking for parking spots all the time, and sometimes quite aggressively for people saying we need more parking. So I agree with the few parking spaces for the medical clinic, and then what about the people that come to see a doctor? Often people have to wait to see a doctor, and there's a bit of a lineup, and so there's even more vehicles, and not even have enough for the residents, 1 per unit, which I think is minimum in my perspective. I think that's a major red flag for me, to have no excessive parking like that. This is coming up from the beach side, north elevation. It is 6 stories, and I think this council ran on saying, we need to stick closer to the OCP. We have a good OCP, and seeing buildings that are going up right now that are 6 stories was one of the reasons why they ran and said it's not going to happen under my watch. So we got to be sensitive to that. I think what you put into this project is incredible. The amount of detail, the plans, the ideas of how you've mitigated the effect of a massive construction are exemplary. But still, we need to look at parking, and in my opinion, what Councillor Skipsey said, looking at the massing of the north elevation is also a concern. I think that Councillor Van der Vark, you're next.
Thank you. I only got through my questions about the suites, so I do share the concern that just because we build a clinic doesn't mean necessarily that we're going to get the doctors, because we have had discussions at UBCM with Island Health about physician recruitment, and it's a big problem for many municipalities. And I don't know that I'm as optimistic as you in terms of if you build it, they will come. Maybe, maybe not, but I don't think we necessarily should count on that. So my feeling is we need the doctors more than we need the space. And I'm wondering about the clinic, what you show as a clinic, pharmacy, lab area on the main floor. And then you show a public terrace just outside of the clinic, pharmacy, lab. But I'm not sure what relationship that terrace has to the lab, or I'm assuming it's a lab. So is it a sort of token public space, or is it really relating to anything else in the building? Perhaps you could enlighten me.
Again, an excellent question, and I wish we'd said more about it. We think it's a very good complementary space. We see these residential areas on the main floor being possibilities for a variety of different types of commercial uses, including, hopefully, uses that will support the clinic activities of pharmacy and so on. Many pharmacies have small coffee facilities and so on. Having an outdoor space on the corner, we worked with your planner on this concept. It's a very good way to keep the building face alive and to relate to the downtown, but it's a use that's, I think, quite sympathetic to pharmacies, other types of commercial uses. I think Ray also mentioned that medical clinics now are even offering things like gathering spaces and yoga facilities and exercise and physiotherapy. So we think all those things kind of benefit having a little outdoor space. It's quite a nice small accent as well in terms of urban design of the community connection for the building. The building isn't just for the people that are occupying it and using the clinic. There is a gesture that's community-wide just by having a nice address at the corner. So I think it's a very, very good social accent in the building, and I think would go well with any number of commercial uses.
So further on that, then I'm assuming that you're not limiting your commercial uses then to clinic, pharmacy, lab.
That's our ideal kind of prospect. We haven't talked about a determined use in those spaces, but we can have further discussion on these things.
You also talked about the possibility, and again, I want to make sure that we're sort of keeping the proposal for housing separate from the proposal for a medical clinic, because I don't know that, and you've tried to do that in your building, in your built form. You've got a certain look for the clinic and you've got a certain look for the housing part. But I think it's important for us to keep the two separate because they don't necessarily go together. So having said that, you talked about the possibility of selling or leasing space in the clinic. And I'm assuming that that would bring you, the developer, quite a substantial revenue. So my question, I suppose, part of my question is what kind of revenue that would bring in, and your rents for residential space. Do you have a sense of what those rents would be? Because rents right now, I think in particular, there is the new building that's kitty corner from this, and my understanding is the rents are quite high for those spaces. So do you have a sense of what the rents might be?
I actually have the units for lease on that building you're referring to across the way. The building in question here would be at market rates. You're looking at around, for commercial rates, around $20 to $25 a square foot, plus your additional expenses, and that's market rent. The residential that you're referring to, they range anywhere from $2,200 to $3,500, originally asking. I think you're right, and they brought it down to about $3,000 for the 2-bedroom top units. But again, that's market rent, and if it doesn't work at that, like they've brought it down. They've brought it down throughout the building, so you're going to find that the rents are going to be whatever is sustainable in the market. Right now, that has come down from what they originally had anticipated, the developers. So they're actually losing. They were anticipating for the commercial 30. They're probably going to end up getting 20. So they're already lost, from their perspective, a lot of money for the next few years. So that, I hope that answers your question.
Can I ask one more question?
Could I just answer your last question a little bit as well, related to the clinic potential revenue? I think Bruce has risen to the occasion, Bruce McClay, to find a way to fund the creation of a facility for a clinic through the residential. It really is an integral kind of relationship for the project. So even though our circulations are separate and so on, it is part of they're all elements in the formula for the whole project.
Yeah, my point more was, I don't want to sort of throw the baby out with the bathwater. Like, if we're concerned about the building, the residential building, but we're being told this is a once in a lifetime opportunity. If you don't do this, then you won't get a medical clinic. There's something doesn't sit well with me for that. So I think we need to keep the two separate. So it is mostly, this is the residential that we're looking at, and it's a massive project in the downtown core of Qualicum Beach. So yeah, it's not really a question, it's just my comment. I do see on page 27 in your package where you're showing the entry to the clinic at Beach Road. There are, because you've got the lane and people are coming into the clinic from the side, in the top right-hand corner there, people are coming into the clinic from the side, and then if they have to go around, they can go around and in. That's your parking ramp. That's where you've got your ambulance parked. That's also the entry to the parking for the residents. So you've got your ramp, then you go into the parking for the clinic, and then the gate for the parking into the residential area. That doesn't seem very safe to me. So that's just a comment. And probably my last comment, who knows? There is a very large arbutus tree that's right about where your courtyard is, your new courtyard. And I'm wondering if you have any inclination to try to keep that tree.
This is a good time for us to invite Julian Waring up to talk about the treescape of the project and his assessment of existing trees. Our landscape architect, Julian.
Thanks, Chris. Mayor, Council. Through the chair, so we did a detailed inventory of all the trees that are currently on site. I believe there are currently 27 or 28 significant trees on site that are classified through your tree protection bylaw. So we are replacing the trees on a one-to-one as required by your bylaw. Unfortunately, the entire site is all parkade. So unfortunately, the extent of the site does extend the parkade does extend very close to the property line, so we won't be able to save that arbutus tree as shown. There is also a number of considerations with existing trees on site when it comes to protection of them and development. Even if possible to protect trees like that, there is always a small risk that they could die 2, 3, 4 years after. So we've done our best to ensure that we're providing more canopy coverage to the site with the trees that we're taking away.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Councillor Harrison.
Yeah, just for a bit of background for council too. They might not have the same background I did because I was liaising with the Perfect Storm Group for several years. When the Patient Care Network was being set up, I attended all 3 meetings, one in Coombs, one in Parksville, one in Qualicum Beach. A Walk With Your Doc event. I'm easily on my second hand for the number of family doctors in our area I talk to about what it's like to actually work in our area. And one of the issues with some of the existing opportunities to work is that a lot of them are 2 or 3 doctor clinics. And for the doctor, you're on call basically a lot. So if you're in a larger practice where you have more doctors, it allows you to actually have more time where you're genuinely off. Anyone who's worked on call know what it's like to have your phone beside you the whole time, knowing at any moment someone might call. It's a bit hard to really turn off that work responsibility. It is something that's viewed as being desirable for new medical grads, but there are a lot of elements to a clinic. Your medical records system, your MOAs, all the different staff that are needed to make a clinic work. So it's a very, very tricky, complicated thing. And I also just wanted to say that I neglected one member of the Perfect Storm Group who is here, but my head and your head is multiple heads in the way, so I'm sorry I didn't see you earlier, is James Dimmick, so apologies for that.
Thank you. So has Councillor Young, sorry, you're next.
A couple points that my fellow councillors brought up about the view for the residents. It'd be nice for them to be able to also see the ocean side. Also, how does your building, like the sight line, affect the surrounding neighborhood? How does it affect their view? Is it going to be blocking what they were enjoying of the ocean view?
I think the difference, I know the building is at the top of a hill with slightly uphill on the north side of the building. I think you get roughly this, and the buildings to the north, to the south face are in the range of about 3-4 stories, I think. So I think by the time you're up a story or 2, the view of the ocean for the sites to the south will not be available. So if you go up higher, it's basically the same situation. So we think that any building that's built on this site kind of takes its own space. And as has been pointed out, we have tried to sculpt the building in the most sympathetic way in terms of the immediate impact on the streetscape. But the views, I think, will be any development on the site, even 2 or 3 stories, would affect the views. So we're kind of in a similar situation with the building we are proposing.
We had approved by the previous owner.
Those views would be only...
We had approved by the previous owner a 3-story building, I think Mr. Woolsey, and that would have taken the views away as well.
Yeah, that's about what I was going to say is the views from the structures across the street that would be affected by views are only 2 to 3 stories, and with whatever is there right now with those structures and trees, they really don't enjoy much view. And with that, which had been previously approved, they wouldn't have enjoyed the view anyway.
Yeah.
As you stated, Mayor.
Yeah, no, we worked with Mr. Woolsey a couple of years, a couple of iterations, and we approved his latest plan, and it was 3 stories, and it would have taken away the view from the people on the other side of the road as well. So in summary, and we have to have an open mind as a council, and this is not a public hearing or a quasi-public hearing, but it's also fair, based from the earliest presentation from Mark Holland and his partner, that it would be fair for us to indicate about the things that we like and not so much, or our concerns. So we've raised a couple of concerns. One is the parking, the north side with the 6-story side to it. Healthcare. The town actually paid for a clinic on Fern Clinic, I think for 2 years, paid $35,000 of your hard-earned tax dollars, and we were told by a Division of Family Practice that if we did that, we would see doctors come. Nothing. So I know you've been in contact with some local doctors, but that would just mean that where they are now would be vacant, and they've come over here if they want to. So this clinic sounds very, very exciting, very enticing. And having an architect who's familiar with codes for building that kind of facility, very impressive. But we've seen efforts by local doctors and Division of Family Practice, and it was very hard because we're competing with the whole country to try and get more doctors. So allowing some professionals, medical professionals, to have a subsidized rental in your building, I think is a very good move. I think that would help, but it's not the only thing. So I think Council is going to have a conversation with Division of Family Practice, and this will probably come up as one of the conversation pieces. So I want to thank you, and I know in Parksville you've built some beautiful buildings. I don't think any of them this high though. So I know you're qualified and you have a good heart to build something that people need. It's going to be very hard for us to identify exactly what we like and don't like about it, but I've given an indication that parking has been an issue, I think, ever since I've been involved in this local government, and that's 28 years. And parking was always a big problem. People like to park really close where they have to go, whether it's to see their doctor or the doctor who's working there, or people who live there, or visit people who live there. They want to park close, and that, I think, is really lacking from what I've seen so far. So then the height, as I said, from coming up beach, where you're leaving the train station, the museum, it's beautiful. So we'd like to see more that matches the community. That's all I'm going to say at this time. Like I said, we're not making a decision, but I thought it's fair. It's fair for us to kind of indicate what we think about the project. And as Mr. Holland said in the earlier part of the meeting, it was fair to let you know what we're thinking. And the public has a right to know what their elected people are thinking. So I think we've tried to be very respectful of the process, keeping an open mind, but just indicating where some of the points of concern are. Thank you. Councillor, any closing comments? Thank you. But that completes the presentation. So yes, Mr. McClay, go ahead.
Thank you very much. After I first bought the property, I was told a lot of people said they need a medical clinic, and they also need residential. And I noticed that from Parksville, and so I designed. But what if we eliminated the medical clinic and just put you all parking? You'd have all the parking in the world. And I like to see the medical clinic go through because the people need it. And we also have parking around the building. We also have parking beside them things. And hopefully we buy a house next door. I'll turn that all into parking eventually. But if you don't want the medical clinic, let's put all parking in there. But I think you're missing the boat. I think you need medical clinic here. And we have other people that really insisted they could get doctors for us. So I think we're going to lose a lot of, I don't know, credibility by not putting the clinic in, but I got to build it. It's going to cost me a lot of money, and I'll do it. I need that infrastructure to hold the building up anyways. But and I like to do something really nice for Qualicum, and I hate to see you lose it, you know. But anyways, that's all I got to say. Thanks very much.
Thank you. And I mentioned earlier, we respect your motivation. I respect your experience, the detail by which you designed this project with your architects, especially with the input from an architect that knows about building medical centers. we're just being a bit shied away by people saying, oh yeah, if he'd built this, we will come, and even paid for the rent for 2 years and still nothing. So we're a little bit shy about that, but we're not saying we don't want a clinic. I'm just saying we're only commenting on the building that we look at, and we're kind of pointing out the fact that it doesn't seem to have enough parking. So I can't comment on saying if we're going to build a design that has no clinic but all parking. We're looking at this project. And this project, in our opinion, from what I've heard, does not have superfluous parking. As a matter of fact, I think it's short. So that's why we're pointing that out. Okay, thank you. So with that, there's nothing else on the agenda, so a motion to adjourn would be appropriate. Councillor Harrison, Councillor Van der Valk, any discussion? All in favor? Motion is, we are adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.